This presentation is part of the course Agile and Lean Production of Software-Intensive Products, offered by Blekinge Institute of Technology together with the Prompt Initiative. One place where the Agile and Lean philosophy is very visible is in the area of requirements engineering. Let's have a look at how requirements engineering differ in Agile Lean from the classic approaches. Software requirement specifications can become quite lengthy documents, and there is a lot of research and effort going into just keeping the requirements document up to date and understandable. For example, there are standards for how to structure the document and how to express the requirements themselves. There is also research on how to take care of requirements from different sources, and moreover, as Tom DeMarco would say, the less you know about the system, the more stakeholders you have, the vaguer you make the requirements in order to avoid committing. So, the bottom line of the long and complex requirement specification is that you lose the overview by trying to overspecify details too early, and because requirements are lousy conveyors of order and stories. The common denominator for much of the requirements engineering best practices is that requirements engineering is viewed as an upfront investment. Some of the approaches are more suitable for a continuous requirements engineering effort, coming from origins in large-scale market-driven requirements engineering. However, the basic requirements engineering practices have their roots in the classic view on requirements engineering, where the requirements are ultimately locked down with a contract before development may commence. This, incidentally, creates another superstructure to deal with change management. This means that even if the requirements engineering is continuous, the analysis checklist and requirements validation is done in much the same way as if the customer relationship was depending on getting the requirements right up front. Agile and Lean changes this. First, because a project is not delivered as one big bang, there is no need to have a complete picture of all the requirements all the time. A more local focus that covers one sprint is usually sufficient. Second, some Agile methodologies advocate that the customer should always be present to resolve issues with immediately. This avoids the need to create a lengthy pre-agreed requirements document, since all issues can be clarified on the fly. Third, Agile and Lean emphasize the story over the requirement. One story may then consist of more than several requirements, put into the context of a system operation. This gives a better overview of what the user would actually like to do, rather than having 200 requirements governing the login button. Side note 1. Agile and Lean of course has a longer perspective than the current sprint. We'll get to that. Side note 2. The 200 requirements on login was not a slip of the tongue. It is common that the parts of the system that is well known gets broken down into excruciating detail, whereas the unknowns are skimmed over. Needless to say, it is hard-nigh impossible to compare the nitty-gritty login requirements with the "we're changing the world" requirements. The RAM model for requirement specification is one way to address this, and the hierarchical cumulative voting method is another approach to address this for requirements prioritization. An example template for a user story consists who is the actor in the story, what that actor wants to do, and the purpose for wanting this. You may also wish to qualify whether the actor actually always wants it, need it, or might want it. An example: as a traveler, I want to track my luggage so that I know it is not lost. There are a few things worth noting here. You may choose another template for your stories. The important thing is that the story is understood well enough so you can discuss it. Moreover, the simple story raises more questions than it answers. This is natural and as it should be. The response to this is to break down the story further, since you obviously need answers to these questions in order to build the right product. Mike Cohn suggests to break down the user story into conditions of satisfaction. These are the conditions or answers that your customer need to have addressed for them to accept the implementation of a user story as done. Putting them on the back of your user story, you can check them off as they are demoed to the customer. An alternative to writing these answers as conditions of satisfaction is to write them as smaller user stories, hierarchically linked to the main user story. These, in turn, may be small enough so that you may write conditions of satisfactions on them. This leads to the question, how big should a user story be? Meaning, how complex and difficult to implement? You will, in fact, have user stories that might take 6 months or more to implement, that are more expressed as a strategic wish by product management. At the same time, you will have user stories that may take less than 4 hours to develop and test. This is natural, and there are requirements engineering methods that are specifically constructed to deal with this. In Agile and Lean, the way to deal with this is to defer the analysis. If you have a big user story, an epic with low priority, there is no need to break it down into smaller user stories just yet. One day, this epic might be the user story with the highest priority, and then you break it down into smaller user stories. Picture it as an iceberg. Once you work through the already analyzed and small user stories, you have essentially shaved the top off your iceberg. What was just under the surface floats up, and you start chopping it up into smaller bits. Below the surface you have all the user stories, big and small, that you do not prioritize just now. This is referred to as grooming the backlog. One more word to remember: theme, which is essentially just a grouping of user stories. For example, if you break down an epic, you have a bunch of smaller user stories that together deal with the epic. These are now united under a theme. Remember, the most important thing with a user story is not that it is verifiable and unambiguous and traceable and so on. The important thing is that it enables and facilitates discussions between people.